I was so afraid to transition. The idea of it. I knew I was trans at 17, and I didn't for over 20 fucking years.
Also, can I be clear about something? That whole thing with, like, trans people getting murdered, like, that was all over the media, and I absolutely absorbed that as a trans-masked person. It wasn't until I was more as an adult and getting more into queer theory that I was like, oh, that's generally directed at trans femmes. Because I absolutely absorbed that message as trans people as a whole. That included me and all of my friends, regardless of their gender. That's how I absorbed that message as a teen.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing is, account for that then. Because in this thing, right? You can say that the whole narrative of trans women being predators and murder victims is essentially gender adjacent. But in reality, it's just oppression. That whole list brought up oppression socialization. That's what it was. Hey everyone. So, real quick, there was something that happened on Twitter, and I know we talk about Twitter a lot because it's the home of discourse and hell.
Yep.
So we've spoken very highly about this particular streamer before because they have been a person we have had a good interaction with offline, or I guess online, but not, okay. Breaker of Halos, thank you so much for the subscribe tier 2.
Mm-hmm.
But this was a take that happened. So to give you context before I show you the take, is that there's been a discussion going on Twitter where a sizable number of people, TERFs, and it seems like, I guess, some bad faith trans mask folks, have been making an argument about how socialization is this very uniform process and how trans femmes have to unlearn their male privilege. And there's been discussions around things such as AFAB only spaces, which is a really interesting idea. And just genuinely things that are awful. Yeah, this is the male socialization discussion. Mom and Ren have thoughts.
Yup. Well, this is one of those ones too where like, no, we need the professionals to show up now and actually explain what socialization is. Because God, everybody's got some other version of it that.
So let's look at the addition. Let's look at the inciting tweet. This is what Malcolm had to say. Malcolm decided to say, and let me blow this up a little bit for y'all. We need to bite the bullet that trans people can be and are often socialized male and female. Socialization is social and can be unlearned. It is not innate. Stop running away from truths that are easily dispelled because they come from people we don't like. So, this is a dumb fucking take and wrong. And I really hate seeing a trans content creator that I actually like say this. I'm genuinely disappointed. As is Zena, because Zena really liked Malcolm for a minute there. And I actually had considered asking to go on Malcolm's trans mask discussion panels. So let's get into it. Why this is wrong. So first off, no, people are socialized to varying degrees with masculine, feminine tendencies. The problem is those messages, and I'm going to use communication theories on this, those messages are by their nature going through a lot of different channels. The first one being is that how the initial message is given, right? Is it given through a show, through parents, through some variation of society or as a whole?
Yeah, so this is the message coming from the outside of you coming in.
Yeah. So first we're starting with just the source. Then between the source and the receiver, you have noise. Right? So there's ways in which cultural influences and various things in communication, plus the level of communication ability, all can confound the message. And then there's also the way the receiver gets it and the way it's interpreted. Now, that function happens to everyone. And there are numerous things, including sensitivities, triggers, and the like, that can change the way a message is absorbed. We can look and say that this idea is supported by socialization. In sociology, socialization is the process of internalizing the norms and ideologies of society. Socialization encompasses both learning and teaching and is thus the means by which social and cultural continuity are attained. Right? So this is strongly connected to developmental psychology. The problem is if there is things that actually confound your development, like trauma or, for example, being trans, there are ways in which these messages don't always land.
Or they land very differently, or the way that you internalize them, right?
So we have Kohlberg's moral development. We have Erikson's psychosocial development. We'll have to talk about those one of these days. Talk about the effects of behaviorism, contrary evidence to behaviorism, because fuck behaviorism. Resocialization, secondary socialization, and so on. So again, we come back to this, and again, socialization is social and can be unlearned. That is true. It is not innate. Also true. But the problem is that nobody is fully socialized as male or female. People receive different levels of messages depending on their environment and what is actually like sent through to them. Right?
Well, and even one example that I like to use is going from like city to city, or even different high schools in the same city. A lot of the things that we noticed growing up when I was in various queer youth groups was that the socialization that people got around gender messages changed greatly, even depending on what high school in the same city they were from. We knew which schools, you could kind of start picking out which schools which kids were from because of their attitudes, right? The ones that were utterly hopeless and pessimistic about everything. No, we knew which high school that was. All right. The ones that were really hopeful, like felt really good about things and, seemed to have like, just a lot of openness and free feeling, gender expression. We knew which high school that was because despite being in the same city, they were getting drastically different messages depending on the culture that was right next to them.
Yeah.
And the same goes for different cities, right? If you've got,
we've talked about that. Your upbringing here and the variations of feminine that you have received as messaging versus the variations that say I received being from like, downtown, from Metro Detroit. So like, this is where we're kind of getting to, folks, is that so no one is fully socialized one particular way. And so there are vague ways that we can theoretically sort of make generalizations, but those generalizations are going to miss a lot of the nuance and a lot of the important stuff. My upbringing was very kind of fucked. I was raised by almost entirely women. I was raised in a family where most of the men were predators. And as such, I had a lot of really negative views about men for a long time. And a lot of that was focused on myself. The belief that I could become a predator at any moment, that I was going to be this terrible person. And I've worked through a lot of that stuff. But the thing is that because of my own trans experience, the reality is that I had to reject a lot of the sort of things that were masculine and never really socialized well into them. In fact, I would actively say, like often to people, is that I was really bad at performing man, because being a man or being a boy, performing those, I was really bad at them. It was like someone doing a caricature because those socializations never leaned in. For example, when other men would start, like when I would try to interact with men and they would do the whole thing of essentially, I'm trying to think how to say this. So like,
we might be a little messy on the language, and that's just going to be how this is. So give us a little bit of a break. This is really, reflecting on personal experiences.
So basically, like the way I would put this is that when I was hanging out with other boys, the thing I would notice is there was always this sense of competitiveness. There was always a way in which it was always trying to get one over on the other person, and that was somehow like this like playful thing. But for me, I took it really personally. Now, some of that's probably borderline, but not all of it. In fact, I found that when I was actually in feminine groups, like when I was around people who had like some feminine in their palette, like Zena, or I was around people who had, who were very feminine, trans femmes and cis women, I would find that, guess what? All of a sudden, that shit didn't happen. Now, this is where I'm going to argue with Malcolm and say that, again, he's saying that socialization is social. It can be unlearned. True. But what he's ignoring is the inborn process by which gender arises. We've made this argument before, and I won't get super deep into it, but I do want to make a clear point that later in this discussion, I want to bring up again how the way that this misses an entire section of things like that Julia Serrano and other people have talked about. But go ahead, Zena.
I wanted to give another good example for how different socializations happen. And there's different contexts for that. Because one of the things that Jess noted was, yeah, there was a really femme upbringing by women. But because of like the skills and the knowledge and also the economics of your family situation, right? The thing that we noted in our relationship is that Jess wasn't really able to get the education to always learn like the household skills of like dedicated like cleaning, cooking, and some of those other things that I got ground into me really, really well. Every opportunity that like my mom, my grandparents, or grandmas, per se, aunts had, I was taught those things. I was taught, you know, the various ways to wash garments. Okay, I know a lot of different cooking skills. That's something that my mom taught us very, very well. And so now as an adult, I'm in a weird place having to use those skills and sometimes start feeling like that femme stuff comes up for me again.
Like, I've actually actively called Zena my house husband.
Yeah,
because just to make it clear that, like, when Zena's taking care of house stuff and I'm working, like this is not Zena engaging in, like, a feminine role. Yeah, that's how our lives happen to be, where I happen to have more time during the day to handle some of that stuff.
And so, like, no, a lot of that socialization did land really weirdly for me because I realized that, no, like, I didn't get taught how to use a lawnmower. Okay, my siblings did, my brothers, but I didn't. Okay, but you know what? Now, you know what? I'm 29 and my younger brother's like, hey, asking me laundry questions because my parents didn't teach him that stuff either. Like, what the hell? And so this is how, like, a lot of the stuff gets taught to us in really strange ways sometimes. And it's not even because of, like, the people teaching it to us.
Yeah.
So...
yeah, so the problem is this tweet in and of itself is very vague. And I get it. It's a tweet, 180 characters, whatever. But the fact is that...
even the premise at the start is not...
bogus.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for cis people. And the fact is that with trans people, I'm going to be really clear. There's a lot of masculine messages that missed me. Because of the way I was upbrought, a lot of masculine messages just felt like caricatures. They didn't make sense in my head. I could sort of perform them. But that's not the only thing that's not entirely like how my experience was. Like, there's still the inborn processes of things. Like, for example, I was a kid that was 5 years old. If socialization was the only process going on, by definition, I would have been into boy stuff. I wasn't. I had a She-Ra doll. I loved She-Ra, the gayest show on television in the 80s.
And I would have been in the same boat. Had socialization been that strong, had I been socialized so much, no, I would have been like a cis girl. That would have been the thing. And by this logic of this premise set up in the tweet here, I would also be having to unlearning how to be a girl in order to be a trans person. And that I just don't think that my trans experience is because I had to unlearn being a girl. There is something fundamentally deeper than that is triggering, you know, me to feel differently gendered in my body.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and I would assume you're in the same boat. Like, it's not that you had to unlearn being a boy to be trans. Like,
yeah, no. In fact, a lot of the things that, like, I would say are sometimes even coded by, I was talking about the original She-Ra, but no, DreamWorks She-Ra is also good. But, like, you even look at the ideas of primary socialization, secondary socialization. Primary socialization is for a child is very important because it sets the groundwork for future socialization. Primary socialization occurs when a child learns attitudes, values, and actions appropriate to individuals as members of a culture, right? So this is very basic stuff, like what a family is, all that kind of stuff. And you can say the early levels of gender here. This is why kids can know their gender expression as early as 4, right?
Mm-hmm. Because they start picking up on that kind of education.
Well, they pick up on those things and they immediately react to it. Secondary socialization refers to the process of learning what is the appropriate behavior as members of a smaller group in large society. The problem is how those land with you and how those messages are sent are very, very different. You have anticipatory socialization where you plan for the future, resocialization, relearning. Now, one can argue.
So this is resocialization referring to the process of discarding former behavior patterns, and reflexes, accepting new ones as part of a transition in one's life. I mean, that would be more accurate, I think, than, the framing in the original tweet is just, behavior patterns. Sometimes we do learn behavior patterns that aren't great, and sometimes it does have a gendered bent to them, as society taught us, but that's a behavior that we're unlearning.
Yeah, and the thing is that, so for example, like, as a trans woman, like, learning to not sit there with your, legs spread open, doing the whole man-spreading thing. Not because I can't do that per se, but because if I want to present as a woman and I want to be in a particular way, I'm going to sit in a way that's going to present me more as a woman. That is a thing that I am doing to learn. That's a behavior. And so, well, yes, there is some level of resocialization. Malcolm is correct about that. You can relearn. I still think this initial argument, right? So we get into gender socialization. So again, boys learn to be boys, girls learn to be girls. This learning happened by way of many different agents of socialization, like we said. The behavior that is seen to be appropriate for each gender is largely determined by the societal, cultural, and economic values in a given society. Gender socialization can therefore vary considerably among societies with different values. And I would say within sub-societies, right, subgroups. The family is certainly important in reinforcing gender roles, but so are groups such as friends, peers, school, work, and mass media. Gender roles are reinforced through countless subtle and not so subtle ways. In peer group activities, stereotypic gender roles may also be rejected, renegotiated, or artfully exploited for a variety of purposes.
Yeah, if that doesn't cover a lot of what we're talking about, no, it really does. And Jess and I were a great example of the economic values shifting gender stuff. That's what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. So Carol Gillian compared the moral development of girls and boys in her theory of gender and moral development. She claimed that boys have a justice perspective, meaning that they rely on formal rules to deny right and wrong. Girls, on the other hand, have a care and responsibility perspective where personal relationships are considered when judging a situation. Again, that would be socialized the way that works. Gillian also studied the effects of gender on self-esteem. She claimed that society socialization of females is the reason why girls' self-esteem diminishes as they grow older. Girls struggle to regain their personal strength when they move through adolescence, as they have fewer female teachers and more and mostly authority figures that are men.
And this stuff is coming from Carol Gilligan.
1990 and 1982.
Yeah, yep. So just for a little clarity of where time period some of the stuff is being talked about and studied in.
Yeah. And so again, as parents are present in a child's life from the beginning, their influence in the child's early socialization is very important, especially in regards to gender roles. Sociologists have identified 4 ways in which parents socialize gender roles. Now, real quick, so here's the thing. I want you to understand this is coming from a sociology perspective, meaning that they are going to always default to everything being socialized, that this is all taught. This is where we get into things like performative theory and the like. But the problem is, and this is what I wanted to take the pin out of, is that I don't think that's true. So I want you to think about this for a moment. We've talked about this on stream before, and it always gets me in trouble. I'm going to get in trouble again. One of the theories that Zena and I hold is that gender is not just a social construct, but rather is a emergent self-schema. That is, there is an inborn knowing that a person has from birth about the directionality in which they feel themselves, they feel how they are, and then based on the information presented by society, that sort of continues to change and sort of define what that is, right? So for example, to define yourself as feminine, you have to have something to compare it to.
Now, to be clear, when we're talking about an emergent self-schema, we are including in that various experiences that you go through in life this includes some of these socializing experiences, okay? As you are going through and getting messages, your parents say something to you. They make a comment about your clothing. You see something in a show. All of that's included in this. And so you as a being are experiencing more and more and more experiences as you grow. And so more and more stuff is getting stacked on this as you age. All right. And so we're not excluding the social stuff, but we're saying there's more to it than just that. That is only one part of this whole piece here. All right.
Yeah, and absolutely. So we have people in chat saying, is it like a lock and key thing? Yeah, exactly. So if you have an emergent self schema, that is, there is a way that your gender is sort of pre-scripted based on a number of different factors, right? Psychological, neurological, physiological, genetic.
Yep.
Whatever those things are then bounced off of the information that comes in. And some things fit in the lock, some things don't. And then that changes. So, and again, because the way the message is sold changes the shape of the key, right? So that's essentially what we're pointing at is there's another factor here that sociologists don't take into consideration because they're always going to focus on social training. But again, we're not going with the whole tabula rasa thing. I'm not a behaviorist. I don't believe there's no internal processes. We are not just taught. We also exist outside of those teachings and inside of them.
I was just going to say to give some basic examples because this is where people get stuck a lot.
Well, I wanted to read something real quick.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
So one part that I wanted to bring up here in regards to this is sociologist gender R.W. Connell contends that socialization theory is inadequate for explaining gender because it presumes a largely consensual process except for a few deviants, when really most children revolt against the pressures of being conventionally gendered. True, because it cannot explain contradictory scripts that come from different socialization agents in the same society. And because it does not account for conflict between the different levels of individual gender and general identity.
So an individual's internal stuff versus,
So even other sociologists disagree with Malcolm on this. Malcolm is going with the very traditionalist view, the view that has come about in earlier times. But even other sociologists disagree that gender cannot be fully explained just by socialization.
Yep.
Now go ahead with your examples. Sorry.
I'm really just kind of coming back to this point just because I know a lot of people kind of are kind of catching up with us a little bit. So if you haven't seen some of our past videos, okay, want to catch a little bit up. We'll have cases where, some kids are, and quite young kids even, figure out they are trans at a young age, or at least whatever, language they have. Okay. Right. Somehow, despite all of the pressures from their parents, they kind of still have some internal knowing of that's not quite right. Right. When your 4 or 5-year-old goes, well, I'm a boy, and the parents were thinking this child's a girl. There's something in there that seems to also be in addition to going with that. And so.
Yeah, because they're comparing off the socialization. The kid is interacting with the societal messaging. They're reacting to it in a non-accepting way. Like R.W. Connell said, contradictory scripts. Again, if there's an internal scripting of, I know sort of internally, but I don't have language for it for what I am. And then someone gives me a message of, you're this, and I go, nuh-uh. Then I'm probably going to, in some ways, then react to that and start bouncing that off of, okay, how am I not like this? So in the case of our society, because we only acknowledge two genders on a greater whole, then, of course, if you don't think you're a boy, then you're probably a girl, and vice versa.
And for some children, that's about what they've got. Sometimes they land in the center, too, and that's also confusing because they're like, wait a minute, but I'm not that thing either. So what's, right? Then we see the lack of language. And so for other kids, sometimes they see the girl messaging and go, yeah, I am that thing.
Yeah.
That's me. And that's cool, right? That happens too.
Yeah. So let's look at this. This is what happened with the Malcolm thread. It got bad.
Back to Twitter.
Yeah. So the issue that happened with Malcolm is that a lot of people, myself included, were pushing back and saying, It's not being socialized, it's traumatizing. By the way, Kadama, go follow Kadama. Kadama's great. Completely disagree. Even if a cis person or trans person are socialized in the same way when they're younger, their experience of socialization is radically different. You may act a certain way because you think it's expected, but it's a facade.
Yep. Oh, that's an absolute.
Moby Dick girl just laughing. Again, what does often mean here? True. Again, in terms of actual human development, we talk about socialization as a lifelong process. So you might be socialized as one thing as a child, but still be going on there. Even if they're different, true.
Yeah.
That doesn't agree with Malcolm, by the way.
Well, this is what we were talking about. But you're still going to continue to be socialized, but your experiences as a teen, then as an adult, right? You keep aging, keep growing, these things keep going. And it is absolutely possible for people to figure out their gender identity later in life too.
But the thing is, Malcolm agrees with this, but the problem is that this process by nature, again, this assumes that there's a uniform thing. And what this person is saying doesn't necessarily agree.
No, it does not agree with the original tweet. Nope.
And so the reason why I wanted to bring this up is that a lot of people reacted to this poorly. And the reason they reacted to it poorly, that in a lot of cases, Malcolm didn't like being pushed back on. He got incredibly belligerent, incredibly aggressive. Seems like, he relearned that male socialization there. And the problem is that, like, a lot of people reacted poorly because a lot of his responses were super aggressive.
Well, and I gotta be honest, the premise is just, I think, utterly false. I'm not gonna give something to TERFs that is just factually incorrect, especially with what we know with what, like, the research is going over. Like, I'm not gonna go bite the bullet for this one to give it to TERFs. Like, no, they don't get that. It's wrong.
Yeah, so it's not socialized, it's traumatized. You can be socialized via trauma. That doesn't mean socialization didn't happen. Then it's not male socialization, it's trauma socialization. You're acting like we go through the same experience as young boys. Young boys don't experience as significantly different. Yeah. Again, I don't even think this works for cis people. True. Because again, the messaging can be different. This is why you can have effeminate boys. This is why you can have very masculine girls, right? You can have tomboys, things like that. Mm-hmm. If the socialization process was so utterly uniform, how does it account for deviance?
Yep.
It doesn't. Which means there has to be an inborn process by which people are gauging their experience, and they only have a limited skill set to work with. This is where the self-schema thing gets complicated, because unless you're working with someone who's fairly postmodern, and that is they have moved to a level where they are able to it, or they're exposed to that type of stuff, by definition, they can only gauge their gender based on things that are presented. And the majority of society is presented as two genders, male or female. So they're going to base it on which one they feel closer to.
And we're talking just developmentally speaking.
Yeah,
right
developmentally
now.
Based on their family, society, and the like. Obviously, when they get older, people can change things. There's numerous examples of people that are either trans women or trans men who later come out as non-binary, or vice versa, right?
A lot of times the stuff we'll key is just noise or unsureness or just kind of vague feelings because the lack of language, which we've talked about in quite a few different videos. So
right, and so like what is taught is male socialization. How you internalize it varies from based on your identity. That doesn't change from what you're taught is my point. But that's not true. We just went over that. The messages are not unified, Malcolm. And there's where I came in. But the internalization is a changing process. Calling it male socialization to that point is just misgendering with extra steps because it fundamentally ignores our experience. I never said it wasn't, but you did. What was taught was male socialization. Ish. The socialization is the same. And again, which male socialization? Because we've already acknowledged, based on looking at the definition of socialization, that there are different ones. This is not unified. Why are you pretending that it is? Within subgroups of a society, there are different variations of masculinity. And those messages, because of noise and because of the interpretation of the person, can be radically different. To say they're one meaning is fucked. People internalize that differently because people are different. True, but you're this is why I hate...
Slow down so we can understand you. You're zooming really fast through all of this.
Fine. This is why I hate sociologists in some cases, because I think they're really good at explaining large trends. I think they really suck at psychology. That doesn't change the socialization that was provided was uniform. It's not, though. We went over this just a few moments ago. But it wasn't uniform. It was transmitted through numerous methods and poorly in many cases. There is no uniformity other than vague trends that shift and change based on region and family system. I was never socialized as male. And here's one of my favorite pictures of all time. I was never a fucking boy. I will stand this picture till the end of time. How do people not know there is no objective thing called male socialization? Due to its subjective nature, it's defined by someone's personal gnosis. We literally cannot view it outside of a subjective lens because it cannot exist outside of subjectivity. True. I don't know what Moss Village y'all come from, but there is a fact that gendered socialization is part of every part of the world. I don't know what to tell you. Yes, socialization happens, but what that socialization means and thus is a product of personal gnosis. Or what I would say is, or Zena and I would say is, emergent self-schema. It is through our own personal schemas, Kadama being based here, it's a good girl, that make it gendered. Otherwise, it's just socialization.
Also, that second to last tweet from Malcolm absolutely falls apart. I don't know what Moss Village all come from, but there is in fact gendered socialization in most every part of the world. That just falls apart entirely. Different cultures, by the way, some of them do have multiple genders. More than two.
Well, again, the gender socialization takes place. That there are times where, again, gendered socialization is going to be so radically different that comparing them is going to be apples to oranges.
Oh, yeah. No,
like,
different parts of the world, too. Yeah.
Like, let's be really clear about this. This is why this thread got to be so problematic. I'm not going to go through the whole damn thing, but this is the literal, like, trend that happened. In every one of these threads, unless the person actively and completely agreed with Malcolm, the fact of the matter is it just turned into this horse shit. Malcolm getting incredibly butthurt and suddenly getting really aggressive because we wouldn't let him win. There were three particular trans women, myself, Layla, and Kadama, who just would not back up. And you can see why, because I wasn't going to accept that shit.
Well, and again, I particularly, I identify as transmasc a lot, and I really, really hate this, because we never put this stuff on transmasc people. We don't go, if somebody wants to tell me that I got socialized like a female, and that was that, and I need to unlearn my female socialization just because... Also,
real quick, my dumbass didn't have that on screen, so I'll just scroll through while Zena's talking.
One, we're still engaging in misogyny. Just hands down, we are. This whole fucking idea that being male is somehow either A, the toxic bad thing, or B, the default, still is coming out. Because if you want to tell me that I'm socialized female, they're not doing that. No one's telling me that, ever. But it would absolutely be uncomfortable to tell me that I need to unlearn my femaleness, right? We look at femaleness as a positive thing when you are going towards, masculinity. That's a lot of the reasons that we tend to see, more masculine women being, more accepted in numerous ways than we see, a feminine boy. All right? Same deal.
Can you put that in YouTube chat as well for people to catch up on, because I was being an idiot?
Yeah. But I hate seeing my partner go through this stuff because I know that that internal sense of gender is screaming in there, right? You are fundamentally being nah, you're not the thing. You're not the gender that you are. That's what this stuff boils down to.
By the way, do not harass Malcolm.
Yeah, probably.
Or anyone else. Do not. The purpose I'm putting this in chat for is so people can see it. The male socialization thing really does concede to TERFs that your AGAB is considered correct and trans people are choosing to reject it. Yeah. Because the problem is when you say, it's well, but you were socialized male. No, the fuck I wasn't. How many male messages I missed? The competitive thing? No, when competition happened, I would start bawling. I literally got so uncomfortable with it that I would have anxiety because I thought that people didn't like me. And also, great rant.
Thank you.
Very good.
No, I hate seeing my trans femme friends and partners go through this.
I was never a fucking boy.
Again, I don't, I'm never gonna give blatantly false information to TERFs as more weapons to hurt my trans femme friends and partners. I'm not. Fuck that noise.
By the way, editors, I'll make sure I send you this link. Can you guys put these on screen as we're talking about them earlier and fix my mistake, please?
Hell yeah.
What did you mean, which picture? What are you talking about, Gene K? Are you talking about this picture, or are you talking about my profile picture? Let me know. But again, I want to read this one more time because I want to make it really, really clear. Sociologist of gender R.W. Connell contends that socialization theory is inadequate for explaining gender because it presumes a largely consensual process except for a few deviants, when really, most children revolt against pressures to be conventionally gendered because it cannot explain contradictory scripts that come from different socialization agents in the same society. Like, you think...
Again, with the socialization argument doesn't work for cis children anyways. It still doesn't. That's exactly what we're getting at.
Yeah, by the way, I love this even different socializations in the same society. Let me be real quick. I'm going to make it really clear. Lil Nas X identifies as a cis gay man, right? Is Lil Nas X the same kind of male socialization as, say, like, your dad in the middle of fucking Tennessee? But male socialization is uniform, he? And because it does not account for conflicts between different levels of individuals' gender and general identity. Yes, Trout Dealer, it does depend on the dad, I suppose.
I mean, that is the whole argument here, right? Depends on the person.
Though I could probably, depending on the state, you probably make some real statements here. So
you could make some overarching stuff.
Here's the point. Like, I still think Malcolm's good. I like Malcolm, but this was an absolute shit show. This thread was basically just Malcolm shitting the bed.
Also, I have listened to some of those panels where they talk about all of the different ways that, like, they got social, or like a bunch of the panelists talked about the ways that they got socialized mail and how that affected them, and how that sometimes those messages landed, sometimes they didn't, and sometimes people had to realize that, like, some of the behavior patterns they were picking up weren't great. Like, I've seen those panels, like, I've seen that particular panel on YouTube. It doesn't support that tweet. It doesn't. It's basically a bunch of people sharing their experiences, explaining the personal side of what we've been talking about for the past, chunk of this whole segment.
You know what? I'll even add in this real quick. You want to talk about socialization? Do you know why I didn't transition till I was 38? Because we lived in a society where trans people were portrayed as monsters and dead bodies.
Yup.
You want to talk about real socialization? Me fucking seeing things like Silence of the Lambs, or every dead chick on a fucking Law and Order, or all of this other shit that happens that essentially leads to the outcome of, I was so afraid to transition. The idea of it. I knew I was trans at 17, and I didn't for over 20 fucking years.
Also, can I be clear about something? That whole thing with, like, trans people getting murdered, like, that was all over the media, and I absolutely absorbed that as a trans-masked person. It wasn't until I was more as an adult and getting more into queer theory that I was like, oh, that's generally directed at trans femmes. Because I absolutely absorbed that message as trans people as a whole. That included me and all of my friends, regardless of their gender. That's how I absorbed that message as a teen.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing is, account for that then. Because in this thing,
right?
You can say that the whole narrative of trans women being predators and murder victims is essentially gender adjacent, but in reality, it's just oppression. That whole list brought up oppression socialization. That's what it was. I was oppressed out of being able to know that was an option.
Now, I'm just going to make...
But gender's a unified thing.
Oh, no. Like, at any point when we're having these conversations, if you are just blanket statement referring to socialization or blanket statement referring to male socialization or whatever, you've missed the fucking point. Like,
True.
You've just missed it. It is helpful in times to go through and dig through individual pieces or individual observations about how these things affect us. That's useful. We can use that to better ourselves and to learn about ourselves and each other. But the blanket statement, No, that doesn't help us. That corners us into boxes even harder.
And it gives up ground to our fucking enemies.
That is just absolutely false. And no, I don't want to be teaching this bullshit to cis kids either. Like, no. God, I want every single person to have the ability to, like, freely express their gender, whatever that may be. Like, I don't want cis kids or trans kids to be afraid of expressing themselves in any format. Like, I don't care how you guys socialize. Just, I want everyone to express themselves. That's it. Everyone.
It's true. Well, guys, with that, let's cut the segment here. We'll see you next time. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, consider donating to us. You can support us on our website, transgirltherapist.org. You can also help us on our Patreon, link below, or you can become a member here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching.